This Sunday's Gospel offers us a pair of stories which highlights once more the centrality of politics and political concerns in the ministry of Jesus. Luke chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. Some people told Jesus about the Galileans, whose blood Pilate had mingled with the blood of their sacrifices. Jesus said to them in reply, "Do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were greater sinners than all other Galileans? By no means! But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did. Or those 18 people who were killed when the tower at Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than everyone else who lived in Jerusalem? By no means! But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did." And he told them this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it and found none. So he said to the gardener, "See here! For 3 years I have come looking for fruit on this fig tree, and still I find none. Cut it down! Why should it be wasting the soil?" He said to him in reply, "Sir, let it alone for 1 more year, until I dig around it and put manure on it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down." In the highly charged atmosphere of Roman-occupied first-century Palestine, atrocity storytellers report a rumor to Jesus about Pontius Pilate murdering Israelite worshippers offering their sacrifice to God. By the way, this story is a lie. It is unattested to anywhere in contemporary literature. It never happened. Pilate did not do that. This lie is a trap for Jesus. If Jesus follows the advice of Amos chapter 5, verse 13, and keeps silent, he will be accused by his Israelite brethren of insensitivity, disloyalty, perhaps even treason. What patriot dares question revolution and guerrilla warfare? If Jesus, however, criticizes Pontius Pilate and the Roman authorities, well, his enemies will surely report him to those Roman authorities, and he will be punished and probably killed for sedition. Too often those who suffer political oppression and their defenders assume that political suffering is the only kind that counts, and they become indifferent to other suffering, especially if it comes from a non-political source. This is why Jesus' response moves the discussion from political rumor to personally shaming God, sin, and suffering. And he concludes with an exhortation that all must have metanoia, all must repent. The Lucan Jesus turns attention from the hated oppressor, Pontius Pilate and Rome, and focuses it instead on the complainers. They should forget all about Pilate and worry about their own relationship to the patron God of Israel. One can only wonder why the questioners did not turn on Jesus and murder him on the spot at this moment, as they had tried to earlier on in Luke's narrative in a similar confrontation in the Nazareth synagogue. By the way, my friends, are any of you involved in social protest? If so, that's very good. There's so much to protest about. There's so much injustice in the world that needs addressing. Good! Just remember that if you really want your protest movement to succeed, you need to keep aware that there is both good and evil among the protesters, just as there is good and evil among the oppressors. Now, what about this barren fig tree? While the preceding discussion concerned the people, this one unmistakably concerns the leaders of Israel, the fig tree, who are stealing life from the people, the vineyard. It was Isaiah, back in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 7, who showed us that the vineyard of the Lord is Israel. Later in this gospel, the leadership, the scribes and the chief priests, clearly understands that vineyard parables are directed to them and told about them. Thus, this present parable unmistakably states that current leadership within Israel, first century Israel, is fruitless and should be violently rooted out. The details of this parable reflect its Mediterranean cultural context perfectly. The vineyard owner obviously lives in the city and rents his vineyard to a tenant farmer who does the digging, the planting, etc. The story reports that he had the tree planted. The fact that the man in this story had the fig tree planted suggests he's not a peasant farmer, but a landowner, a landlord from the city who hires landless laborers. The Palestinian fig tree bears fruit 10 months out of the year, and so one could reasonably expect to find fruit on it at almost any time. The time sequence regarding fig trees in Israel is this. First, the tree would have 3 years to grow after planting. The fruit of the next 3 years is considered forbidden. The fruit of the 7th year is considered clean and ought to be offered to the Lord. So the owner in this parable has come seeking fruit for 3 years. That means it's 9 years since it was planted. And the situation begins to look hopeless. He rightly urges that it be rooted out, but the gardener urges mercy. Give the tree yet another chance. By the way, digging trees out rather than cutting them down was the common practice. Recall in Luke chapter 3 verse 9 where the axe is laid to the root of the tree rather than the trunk. Keep in mind that this parable is not really about trees. What it's about is first century Israel's leadership, the corrupt elite. The gardener's proposed remedy for the tree's problems reflects Jesus' mastery of insult humor. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus, the authentic Mediterranean native, the authentic Middle Eastern male, resorts to insults on a regular basis, and they are always gems. Jesus was a master of the insult. The gardener might have proposed the usual remedies, new soil for the tree, maybe increase the watering. Instead, he proposes spreading shit all over it. Jesus' original peasant audience undoubtedly roared with laughter. This is just what those shitty leaders need. Most English translations, including the New American Bible Revised Edition, completely sanitize this. In Aramaic, there is a wordplay between dig it out and let it alone, also the word for forgiveness, which makes the parable and its point very easy to remember. Judgment? Dig it out? No. Mercy and forgiveness. Let it alone. You know, a tree cannot lift itself out by its roots. They, the leaders of Israel, the Judean elites, need the intervention of an outsider, the gardener, the patron god of Israel himself. My friends, dedicated reformers are often so focused on the evils to be exterminated that they neglect the need for personal reform as well. This is as true of all as it is of leaders. This is the point of the Lucan Jesus, the one he makes in this Sunday's masterful cluster of readings. The gospel passage is beautifully appropriate to Lent. Enough said.